Alright, so just to get it out of the way, no one hates each other, and no, Cody's not an idiot, even if he might be a bit of a buzzkill, and no, there's not going to be a third alternate history civil war. But I didn't quite agree with Mr. Hub's take on industrial Rome, which is actually from a year ago in his video 10 alternate scenarios that are actually dumb, but which I was reminded of when he re-released it in his latest video, the dumbest alternate history scenarios. Anyway, if you've watched my 1 hour and 20 minute video on If Rome Industrialized, my magnum opus, my greatest creation, with a whopping 32-minute intro, yeah, I stopped doing that. I don't know what my issue was. I literally just couldn't help making long-ass intros. Anyway, if you watched that video, you'll know that I spend a long time discussing industrialization around the world. It might as well have been a video on why Rome couldn't have industrialized with a bit of alternate history sprinkled on top, because actually Cody's right on that one. It couldn't have. He kind of tackles it in a different way in his video, which isn't necessarily wrong, but in my opinion is intellectually incomplete. So Cody argues that industrialization requires 15 prerequisites, of which Rome satisfied only 4, those being food surplus, domesticated animals, mathematical concepts, and a separation between the natural and supernatural realms. He then says Rome failed in connecting physics, mathematics, and engineering, in developing sophisticated economic theory, overcoming the economic stagnation induced by slavery, fostering a strong middle class with social mobility, and inventing machine tools, calculus, capitalism, and the scientific method. Now, there's a bit of truth here. For one, history is highly contingent, dependent on context, culture, institutions, and the interaction of multiple factors. In this sense, both Cody and I agree, industrialization is a complex process. But in my video, we explore this explicitly. We look at how different societies around the world industrialized under dramatically different conditions and triggers. Belgium and the Germans relied on state-driven models, but Britain used private capital. Japan imported foreign technologies, and the United States innovated its own. Rome, by contrast, lacked the institutional and cultural conditions that would allow incremental technological accumulation to scale up into industrialization. Cody is also 100% right to highlight the role of slavery in suppressing Roman industrialization. In my video, I dedicated a lot of attention to this because abundant slave labor eliminates the incentives to mechanize or innovate, an effect which we explicitly observed in later slave societies such as Brazil and the American South. Slavery blocked the development of merchant-driven, wage-based economics, which are crucial for sustaining industrial growth. But, unfortunately, I think that Cody's analysis is really lacking in many other respects. The main reason I say this is because his whole rejection of the concept of Roman industrialization is simple, rigid, and categorical. And to be fair, he only really spent a few minutes on the subject before moving on in his video, but still it irked me. Cody inadvertently contradicts his rhetorical statement about history's non-linear trajectory when he treats industrialization as a checklist of prerequisites. For example, he says Rome lacked the scientific method. Sure, it did, but that wasn't the prohibiting factor. It's sort of incomplete framing. He's looking for a 17th century solution to a 1st century problem, but there's a deeper underlying core here. Rome lacked institutionalized empiricism. This is one of the main things separating it from, say, Britain. We spent a decent amount of time on this subject in my video. Brilliant innovators like Archimedes existed, or Hero of Alexandria, in Rome, but their work was isolated, secretive, and embedded in the craft system which Rome's economy was built on. It was not shared in schools or universities that could systematically train new generations of engineers and scientists. The absence of a Roman school or a networked intellectual infrastructure of some other sort was thus, in my opinion, the actual significant factor here, rather than just the absence of a formalized scientific method. But maybe that's a nitpick. Alright, well then let's go deeper. Let's situate this in Rome's cultural context. Roman society valued physical labor and military achievement. They did not value intellectualism in the same way the Greeks or the British did. Particularly important, the Roman elites had a great disdain for the merchant class. That suppressed the social and economic power of the merchants, further constraining the environment for innovation. But the most critical thing, I think, a point I make over and over in my video, is that Roman technology was mostly created for military, logistics, or for the elites. Okay, why is that important? Because the problem is dynamic. Cody's checklist, and especially I think at least the shallow nature of some of the boxes on it, like scientific method or capitalism, reduce a very complex historical dynamic into a very rigid framework that lacks depth. I'm not sure what his exact thoughts on the subject are, given, again, we only have this small excerpt from his video. But if this is his entire view on the subject, it's not very holistic. In my video, I came up with a long list of prerequisites for industrialization, and explained over and over that they were a simplification for the sake of a YouTube video, that these checkboxes, if you want to call them that, which I laid out, were not the be-all end-all for when a country industrializes, period, but that they were a tool for crafting the hypothetical where Rome does industrialize. But the most important thing there is that I explained why most of the things I listed were explicitly interdependent. Industrialization is a path-dependent and cumulative process. It's not a simple checklist, and even if we want to reduce it down to a checklist model for the sake of speculation, like I admittedly did, that checklist becomes really complicated, intertwined, and interdependent. Cody also misses some other topics. He doesn't note Rome's advanced logistics, taxation, its trade guilds, the collegia, nor does he consider exogenous shocks like plagues or revolts, which are legitimate historical catalysts for change, nor does he address the core worldview of the Roman Empire. This was one of the most interesting things for me when I was researching my Roman industrialization video. Rome viewed itself as part of a cycle of empires, while Britain viewed itself as a step on the inevitable march toward progress. These are inherently very different philosophies, and color a lot of the work the Romans and British did when building their respective empires. Anyway, I just think Cody's take is far too static. The way we looked at Roman industrialization in my video, which you should all definitely set aside the time to watch, was by diving into the granular Roman history, looking at the Siege of Syracuse, the Annona system, the good emperors, the Antonine Plague, the specific technological advancements of the Roman Empire, etc. We started with the contextual breadth that spanned across cultural movements and periods of Roman history so that we could go through and use alternate history magic to make all sorts of little changes throughout Roman history to produce the scenario that I ended up coming up with. That took effort, research, actual counterfactual analysis, and some serious historiography. I was diving deep there, Cody. Maybe that's why I felt compelled to make this video in the first place. It's possible, at least in my opinion, to actually extract meaning from an unrealistic scenario like the Roman Empire industrializing, and Cody and I agree on that unrealism part. The probability of Rome having industrialized is vanishingly small. I admit this repeatedly in my video. The difference is, unlikely doesn't mean dumb. We can actually embrace realistic speculation within an unrealistic hypothetical. Once you've used your alternate history magic to make various fundamental changes that alter the timeline to get to your industrial Rome or what have you, you can then directly address the realistic consequences of your changes and the butterfly effects into the future. I did this in my video. I made a ton of changes that fundamentally altered Rome's social, political, cultural, technological, and economic trajectory, and then looked at how those changes affected Rome throughout history. That's why it's compelling in the first place, because it's coherent and not just throwing paint on the map and hoping it sticks. And we can get there while acknowledging the unrealistic nature of the premise. If you can get past that and the framing of this question as dumb, then you open the door to a world of counterfactual thought that can actually offer respectful, thorough insights that actually encourage engagement with the real history. And that gets at the whole reason I make these videos in the first place, and maybe the reason my introductions used to be so long. Get ready for the soapbox, guys. Alternate history is a tool to get people to engage with real historiography. Before I even took over this channel, the only reason I was interested in history was watching AlternateHistoryHub and Monsieur Z and What If Alt Hist on YouTube. RIP to the latter two. The what if questions got me researching the real events. I started learning about American history and World War I and started going beyond my high school history classes and diving into the books and JSTOR articles and 3-hour-long YouTube video essays. And it all gave me a greater grasp on how history actually unfolds, the vectors that push history in certain directions, the economic influences that you can see throughout the whole timeline, the outliers and great men and unavoidable crises and everything in between. By still asking the questions, the what-if questions, even if they're dumb ones, we open the door to look at how industrialization really happened, why it didn't, and the what-if becomes a tool to explore how historical causality, incentives, and institutions actually interact in the real world to move time forward. It is far from simplistic steampunk fantasy. It's a stress test for history. When we ask, why didn't Rome do this, we're forced to actually understand what Rome was. Before I let you all go, let's make sure I get off my high horse here. I'm not a better teacher or a better alternate historian than Cody, even if I am jealous that he can get 80,000 views in like 2 hours on some video. At the end of the day, we're all just random guys making YouTube videos about things we find interesting. Hell, I've made some awful videos in the past, a few so bad that they're now privated. But this framing from Cody's video just kind of struck me as particularly bad. Anyway, that's where I'll be leaving this video for today. As always, let me know if you enjoyed it, or if you have any critiques or notes, be sure to leave a comment for the algorithm, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. You can support us by joining our Discord or by becoming a channel member with the join button below. Thanks for your time. This has been the US of Z, signing out.